Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Good
Michelle.
morning.
Good morning, Michelle.
Okay, it appears we are live, and good morning. Thank you for joining us for the Citizens Bond and Override Advisory Committee meeting. Our meeting time today is from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. and we are asking to have a firm end time at 12 p.m. because a number of our committee members do have obligations this afternoon. If we have the agenda in front of the committee, I'll ask for a committee member to call the meeting to order, please.
This is Patty Beltram. I move to call the meeting to order.
This is Danielle Padilla. I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. The meeting has formally been called to order and the motion has passed. If we move on then to agenda item number 2, we do have approval of the May 14th, 2020 Citizens Advisory Committee meeting minutes.
This is Annette McCarty. Since these were distributed yesterday, if everyone's comfortable that the information is correct, I move to approve the minutes.
I second that motion. This is Kurt Hobbs.
There's a typo on the third page.
Thank you. And Dr. Beltram, I see your hand is raised. Do you have a comment?
Sorry, hit that instead of mute.
On the third.
And that's name is wrong.
Okay, we apologize for that. Would the motion be amended to approve with the correction being made?
I move to approve with the correction. This is Annette. Thanks, Ray.
And could the committee member who offered the second repeat that, please?
I will second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. And as a housekeeping item, if the committee, when you're not speaking, if you could please mute your mics. We are experiencing some feedback here with the audio. Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Also, as we move to the next agenda item, I would like to acknowledge that we do have our governing board president, Mr. Sandoval, who is attending the meeting today virtually, as well as our superintendent, Linda Pallas-Thompson. So with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is public comment. Mrs. Watson, do we have any public comment today?
No, Michelle, there were no public comments received.
Thank you. We'll move on now to agenda item number 4. And Robert, if you would please pull up the presentation from last week. And thank you. And I will have a 60-second delay on my end, and then we'll continue. One moment, please. Thank you very much. With that, I won't dedicate meeting time to go through all of the slides with the presentation that we covered last week when we met. This is the same presentation. What I would like to ask Robert to do is to go through to the scenario slides, if you would, please. And we'll look at scenario number 1. And just as a reminder, the committee did take action to provide scenario number 1 as an option for consideration for the governing board. And then if you would go to scenario number 2, please. Thank you. As a reminder, the committee did take action to provide this scenario as a recommendation to the governing board. In addition, prior action was also taken to recommend a renewal of the 13% override in its current form with current categories. So per our meeting minutes and past meetings, we have 3 scenarios that have had action from the committee as we have met and reviewed information and options. And so if we continue down, please, to what we'll call the member input scenario toward the end of the presentation that we looked at last time. There was conversation, and with the next agenda item, we have a tabled motion for action and consideration. But I have had a subsequent question from a committee member regarding the column where we identified estimated remaining 2012 bond proceeds and capital budget allocations over 5 years. Assumes continued district additional assistance restoration. And last, I shared that at the peak of the cuts, Peoria Unified's portion was in excess of $15 million in 1 year of reductions. And so it's important to have the caveat that within this column, there is an assumption that that capital restoration will continue. And so what I was asked to do is, can you break that out between what is the remaining bond dollars as well as the district additional assistance portion? And so Robert, if you would please bring up the committee input scenario. Thank you. Perfect. We'll have to enlarge that. The top grouping that I'm presenting answers that question, and we'll make that larger. Hopefully everyone can see the whole thing. And what this has done is it took the one column, which had the combined $44,165,221 that you also saw in the other scenarios, scenario 1, 2, and 3, where we were identifying approximately $6 million of capital funding each year in conjunction with the remaining bond proceeds from the 2012 authorization. And so in this breakout, and you might have to make it a little bit larger, Robert, it does seem to be small on the screen. If you make it, again, as large as you can, it breaks out the amount into 2 columns that are kind of an orangey color. And if we scroll to the right, thank you, right there, you'll see there are $14,633,285 of projected bond proceeds that will remain at June 30th, 2020. Of course, we've not closed the year, and I do have the caveat, this is an estimate, and this is the number we've been working with the scenarios over our recent meetings. And then you'll see the breakout of the capital portion. To answer the question that a committee member had, what was the breakout? Now, if you go down, I just want to highlight one thing, Robert, if you scroll down, and you'll notice here, we'll pause and maybe make that a little bit smaller, just one reduction. Okay, perfect. The caveat of the funding continuing in its current form has assumptions built into it, and with COVID-19 and economic considerations, there's always the chance that restoration or that funding could change in the future. So as an example, in this next box, which has the same information, it shows what it would cost if we received only half of that proposed restoration, and that $29,531,000 was reduced to $14,766 as an example, and then the impact on the subsequent amount that would be applied to a new bond. So I just wanted to comment that we have assumptions in that member scenario. And then just the other comment, if we go to the next page, please. I was also looking at the minutes, and there was conversation at the last meeting on the land piece. And Robert, I'm going to have you make it smaller and scroll to the left so the whole page is visible. And so one question that was asked was, could the land be added to a contingency column? And the answer is, if that is a recommendation from the committee, that is a possibility. But I'd also like to comment on our past voter information pamphlets, and I have confirmed with our bond counsel that in all of our voter information pamphlets, as we have what are called the project categories that basically total the bond authorization, and as an example, we've got proposed categories with what we've been looking at. We always have in the voter information pamphlet the language that allows us to buy land. And I want to remind the committee of that. And with that, if the committee chose not to have a separate line item for high school land, there could be an added descriptor to the high school priority upgrade repair category to add including land purchase, and you'll see I have that in red. And the amount, the 13 million that we previously had broken out, could be redistributed through that contingency column in either a weighted manner, and that's the fourth box down that I have, or the top box. In this case, the example splits it 10 million, 3 million. And the reason why I'm pointing that out is even without the separate category of land, we do within our voter information pamphlet have the ability to purchase land with the language that we place in the actual pamphlet. And Robert, I'm going to have you expand that and increase the size so the committee can see it clearly. And the reason why this is important is twofold. If we don't have land in our recommendation for a bond or a dollar amount that could be used for a land purchase, and before we have our next bond election, there's an identified parcel that's a perfect match for our needs. And also from a price perspective, it's a competitive price. If we don't have the ability to move on that purchase, it could certainly be detrimental to long-term planning. So I just wanted to share with the committee that the voter information pamphlet does have broad language related to land purchases. We do have the ability, if we don't want to have a separate land line item, to add including land to the high school priority line. And the 13 million that was originally broken out could be redistributed into the contingency columns.
Michelle, this is Kirk Hobbs. I have a question. If we move land to the repair and add it as a contingency, does that change the rule or the policy that the governing board would have to approve the purchase of that land?
Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. That's a very good question. No, it does not.
Thank you.
Michelle, this is Ray Connolly. By moving it out of its own line item into contingency, can we still remain transparent to the voters?
We do have a requirement each year to report to our community in October how we have expended our bond proceeds. And so any purchase of land would be, first off would be approved by the governing board, and then secondly would be part of that annual reporting. And the reason why I'm reminding the committee that we always include land as a descriptor in our pamphlet, as well as it can be added to the ballot question. And again, we work with our legal counsel on this. And so we would ensure that it's legally correct, and it's in alignment, frankly, with how we've had language with our past bonds. It would still allow for the option to purchase land, but if the right parcel wasn't identified or there were other needs related to buildings and campus projects, it's in the same category where there's a little more flexibility. So as the committee continues to evaluate a member input option, you could certainly add this more expansive language to your consideration, or you could also bring that as an option to our governing board to consider.
Michelle, this is Rick. I have a quick question. I'm confused a little bit because I thought I heard you say things that sounded contradictory. Whether the land purchase is called out as a line item explicitly in the voter pamphlet or in proposals to the governing board or wherever, or whether it's just put in a contingency fund and the district has always said we have that option as a contingency as part of the voter pamphlet stuff. It sounded like at first you said the governing board would have no say on whether that land was purchased or not. And then it sounded like you said, no, the governing board would make that call. Can you clarify that for me?
Absolutely, and I apologize if my first comment did not come across clearly. It was not my intention to say that the board would not have input. Our governing board would approve the documents related to a land purchase in the similar way that they do whenever we receive a land donation. So I apologize if that wasn't clear. I was intending to be consistent with both responses.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that the governing board does have the say on basically they have that say on it. They approve each of the individual bond sales and their components. And it would just be incumbent upon them to understand what it is they're approving at that point in time.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a good summary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Members, are there any questions on the presentation from last week? I know on May 6th and then last week on May 14th, we spent a lot of time looking at amortization examples. We've looked at a short-term, long-term, and a medium-term amortization. We talked about the medium amortization allowing more flexibility for a new construction bond in the next few years. We've looked at the scenarios that I've revisited today, and I just wanted to answer the question from a committee member on the breakout of the remaining bond proceeds and capital, to speak to the assumptions that are embedded in that, and to remind the committee that we always include land as a purchase option in our voter information pamphlets, and I have confirmed with our legal counsel that it is not a requirement to have it as a separate broken out line item. It could be included in a high school line item to add the language including land purchase. Are there any other questions on what I have covered or we've covered previously before we move on to the next agenda item?
Michelle, this is Rick again. I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if my microphone was on. Did you send this slide out to us? Because I'm not finding it in my emails, and it just might be because I'm lost, but was this particular slide sent out to the committee members yet?
It was not, because the slide was just completed this morning. We had a very
understood. Yeah, okay. But you can send that out to us?
Yes, and we'll also include that as part of the meeting materials.
Okay, thank you.
The intention of the slide was to answer the question on the combined remaining bond proceeds and capital funding, to show an example if the full $29 million of estimated capital funding over the next 5 years doesn't come to fruition, what that might look like if it was cut in half. And then just to illustrate, if there were committee recommendations related to the land, what that might look like, and what is permissible in the pamphlet. And you will note that I have the caveat on all of these scenarios 2 through 4, that these are for illustrative purposes to help answer the committee's questions. And it looks like we have a question from Mrs. Briggs.
Yeah, mine is kind of a point of order question. So if the committee did want to put the land purchase into the other category, not have it as a separate category on the 2 previous scenarios that we already voted on, as far as procedure goes, how would that work?
Thank you. The committee would need to make a motion to propose that scenario, and it would need to be seconded, there'd be discussion, and then there would need to be a majority vote.
And just to be clear, the reason why we would consider moving the land to a contingency would be that it would give us additional dollars in contingency, that in case we had some emergency related to repairs, that we'd have more dollars available to address those concerns. Is that the reason we were considering or adding this option?
Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. Yes, that is something that the committee can consider. And so with that, with the last two boxes, and I'll have Robert expand this if you can. And again, you've seen this before. This is the same slide from the presentation. The difference, and that's why I've highlighted it in blue, it's showing the movement of in the top scenario on this page. If we're on page 2, is showing it being broken out as 3 million and 10 million additional contingency. And then the fourth scenario shows it being allocated in a weighted manner proportionately among all 3 contingency categories.
Hi, Michelle. This is Annette McCarty. This sounds like a pretty good idea from a couple perspectives. One, the rules with, Title 15, among other things, and reporting for school districts is so restrictive that I see that this is just a matter of being a little bit more flexible instead of so rigid for the governing board to make these decisions down the road. So I see that as a benefit. And the other part of it is because the continued district assistance is one of those that at this moment is almost viewed as a gift from our state because of not properly funding our school districts. I can also see it going away pretty quickly, and depending on how the rest of the next year or two shakes out. So I think that this flexibility will be in moving, making the recommendation for that line item to move gives flexibilities in a couple ways.
Members, are there any other comments?
Michelle, this is Jan. I think as long as the public knows that that contingency fund with quote unquote high school land in it is used for other things, and then the public needs to know that, like, later on in the future, if there's not extra money left in the bond for land, they'd want to know why, we are asking for it again, unless we don't specifically ask for land right now and moving this money into the contingency fund. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm just saying.
Thank you, Jan, for your comments. And this this additional scenario slide has been emailed out to the entire committee. Are there any other questions related to the clarifying information? Again, it's the same slide that was part of the presentation last week that we looked at in depth. It breaks out the $44,165,221 between the 2 orange colored columns, identifying what portions related to bond and what portion would be related to capital as estimated at this point in time. And then it does provide that clarifying illustration related to land and also what it would look like if the capital amount was reduced to 50%. Again, we don't know what those funding levels will be. Our assumption and our hope would be that the district additional assistance capital restoration continues. And we've been very appreciative of the fact that there has been restoration. It's really made a difference. And so we certainly hope that that does continue, but knowing there are some unknown economic factors that might be short-term, but it could impact fiscal year 2022 as an example. I just do want to offer that caveat, all things being equal, that funding may not be at the same level as being projected, although we certainly hope it will be. Are there any other questions before we would move on?
Real quick question, Michelle, getting to Jan's question about how this, the visibility of about where land dollars are at. How would the public see, if we did add land to one of these contingency columns, how would the public see that, or would they even see that?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Hunt. So each time we sell bonds within an authorization, the identified sources and uses within that bond sale are part of the resolution. And so if a bond sale was going to include the purchase of land, it would be identified there, as well as any documents related to the purchase of land would be part of a governing board public meeting and would require board approval. And then each year in October, we report out expenditures by category, and then we have more detailed examples of those expenditures by site and by category and project. So the point, if it is indeed not a separate line item and part of the broader high school priority renovation upkeep line item, is twofold. It would allow the flexibility as work continues with a new committee on facility utilization and assessment and the identification of the location of the next high school, that the district would have funding in place to be able to move if that timing was right, not only from a decision making with the governing board and administration, but also from a price perspective. If we wait to include land with new construction several years from now, we don't know what the market would look like. We're basing the cost right now as $13 million, and that is a very conservative high-end estimate. And what I mean by that, when Mr. Deeg worked on getting pricing, and we shared that a couple of meetings back, pricing, as I would say, related to land for our high school, we got a variety of costs associated with acreage, with the caveat depending on where that land is. So there could be a lower cost as well related to the land purchase. We've identified what the highest amount might be. So that also is helpful. The thing to remember as well, by statute, with an authorization, a district does have the ability to transfer between categories up to 10% of the bonds sold. Now, the challenge with that is you do sales over time, and you would have to sell enough bonds if you had a separate land line item as an example, and you needed those bond budget dollars in a renovation line item, you would have to wait until you had sold enough bonds to have that 10% to do the transfer. So another reason why it's helpful to have it not as a separate line item is the price could be less than the 13 million. And then secondly, if there are identified needs, you aren't waiting until you've got an amount that's 10% of bonds sold that's large enough to transfer to address a critical repair at a school. So there's a benefit in two ways by not having the separate line item, yet the voter pamphlet will state clearly that we can purchase land if that is the direction from the governing board and appropriate for our planning. And we're not waiting for a new construction bond to make that purchase down the road. Now, of course, the caveat would be if all of those contingency dollars and allocated amounts that we have identified based on the critical and the essential projects from ADM with their more refined 5-year planning horizon, and there are surprises related to critical repairs. And I'll ask Mr. Duguid to share an example that we've had at one of our elementary schools regarding the sewer system. The money that would be in that line item could ultimately need to be used for repairs and upkeep. And so that's the downside of it being in the combined line item. You're not necessarily setting that money aside because you're saying it could be used for either or. Mr. Duguid, do you want to speak to some examples of where we've looked at repairs and found that there was a significantly more expensive price tag related to the repair?
Sure. One of our elementary schools, it's not our oldest and it's not our newest, it had sewer line that has basically over the years deteriorated to the point that it's about it's in between 700 and 800 linear feet. And to repair that line is a price tag of approximately $280,000. So that's an example of things that can prop up or crop up, that are unseen for some time. So I guess, Michelle, that'd be a good example of dollars that pop up that sometimes we're not expecting.
This is Ray Connolly. My concern, to be honest with you, is the district assistance money. I don't know how firm it is in terms of us losing money because of what's going on with the economy, but that will impact so much, including technology. And as somebody sitting in a chair who is having to think about how we're going to be faced with what education looks like in just a couple months, I'm petrified that we are going to be sorely lacking in the technology that was already on the low end. And then if we don't have that money with such a skinny budget, I just think that we're painting ourselves into a corner. I think we have to look at that $29 million and think, if it's not there, where else is it? And at 71 million, like I said, I feel like we're painting ourselves into a corner. It's too skinny.
This is Melissa Briggs. I completely agree with that estimate. At this scenario, I feel like is going to handicap the district.
This is Danielle Padilla. I agree with their statements.
Okay, members, thank you. Perhaps what I should do, if we've answered the questions, we can certainly move to the next agenda item, which would then allow more complete member discussion related to any proposed action items. Before we move on, in regard to what we've covered in the presentation and the additional information that I've shared this morning, are there any specific questions for administration before we move on?
Michelle, this is for Sean Duguid. I saw that he sent an email to the group this morning. I was hoping maybe he could share the question that came in from, I don't know who it was, but I've read busing.
Yeah, sure, Annette. And good morning, by the way. The question came in from a committee member with regard to the number of students who are bused specifically from the Vistancia area to our two high schools in the north, Liberty and Sunrise. So those numbers came in at, there's 9 through 11th grade, there's 466 eligible students that could ride the bus. We have a total of 6 buses that go out to that area. And as it stated in the answer, is 123 seniors that are eligible, but 98%, if you think of seniors, are probably either riding with friends or driving themselves in. So they're eligible for a total of 589 students that are bused from the Vistancia area. By definition, students on a variance, so in that area would be going to attend Sunrise, would have to find their own means of transportation to Sunrise Mountain, and that's across the board. If we had students that, I'll just go to my old example of Oakwood, that attend Oakwood on a variance, they have to get means of transportation not through our buses, but by their parents or what have you. So does that answer your question, Annette?
Yeah, I just thought it was good for the public.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, if I can add a final comment, with critical needs bond scenario number 3 that was in the presentation last week, that scenario showed a similar scenario to the second option that was considered at the $113 million total amount without land. So just to remind the committee of the options we've looked at so far, that third option is also something that could be considered, as well as scenarios 1 and 2 that the committee has already taken action on.
Michelle, this is Ray Connolly. This one does take the high school land out, and it was not included in contingency, correct?
That is correct. And it has the higher $119 million total identified essential and critical projects over the 5-year planning horizon from ADM Group, as well as the larger but not full technology and transportation amount, but does not include the land purchase. And with scenarios 1, 2, and 3, because those scenarios include the full $119 million, there is more flexibility to absorb district additional assistance funding cuts versus when you get down to those smaller authorization thresholds, it does create less ability to navigate those potential cuts. But yes, scenario 3 does not include the land. I'm just reminding the committee of the 3 scenarios that were in the presentation last week that we've looked at and discussed over a couple of meetings, and then the member input scenario, which we looked at in detail last meeting. But before we move on, I just want to make sure all questions have been answered.
Michelle, this is Rick. I've got a couple things I wanted to comment on. First of all, I think you just answered my first question. In scenarios 1, 2, and 3, because we're more or less funding all of the what were called essential and critical facilities needs, there is no contingency to speak of. We're going to use the flexibility that amount of bonding gives us to move 10% around to effectively become contingency funding. I think that's the correct interpretation.
If I may clarify, I wouldn't say it's related to the 10% option that districts have to reallocate based on bonds sold, but more so by addressing the full $119 million of needs that were identified. It has a much broader net to ensure you haven't missed anything, where with the smaller amount, the contingencies to try to estimate what you've missed.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense. That's good. And then, I kind of want to echo Annette's comment that if you move the land on that fourth scenario, and I would like for us to call it that so we know what we're all talking about, that on that fourth scenario that the land, because we have the option when the bonds are issued, move that land to the contingency category just in case it's needed for something. And I would say that I spoke with Senator Gray this morning about what's going on at the legislature, and he said that district additional assistance was like the main topic, or certainly a very, very significant portion of their discussions down there, and that he was going to try and get back with us on what the current status is. But right now, it sounds like the plan is to have some money in there for district additional assistance, but he wasn't sure off the top of his head how much it was going to be. And then the third thing I wanted to say, I wanted to go back to a comment that Melissa made, and I would like to go back and if we did not put the land in scenarios 1 and 2, I think we should probably go back and do that. And I would support that I could second that motion if someone wants to make it, if it's not there now. And the other thing I'd like to do is I would like to, if we can, I'd like to go back and change my vote. I think I voted no on scenario 1. And I've been thinking about it. We should give the governing board every option that we've talked about and let them make the call. So I want to go ahead and support scenario 1 as well, if I can change my vote.
Rick, I don't think you can, and if I may offer in the next agenda item, it's action, and so if we can hold some of that dialogue to the next agenda item related to motions and discussion and prior votes. If I may, please also comment on the future of district additional assistance restoration. I mentioned it last time we met, and I'll summarize it again today. In essence, 1 year of cuts, capital funding cuts, is being restored over 5 years. And so during that 5-year time frame, we've been very fortunate that basically within the first 2 years of the 5 years, the economy was so good and the state budget was able to support restoring years 1, 2, and 3. And so then for next year, initially during the preliminary budget discussions, the state was going to sync up years 4 and 5 and fully restore the 5 years in 3 years, which was wonderful. But then with the skinny budget, with the base support level budget, that acceleration, if you will, was taken off the table, which was a reduction of about $2.8 million in potential capital funding, as an example. So we know that with the base support level budget that has been passed for fiscal year 2021, we do have an identified district additional assistance amount. My comments for the future for fiscal year 22 and years after is there are some unknowns with COVID-19, and if it's a rapid or a prolonged recovery and impacts related to sales tax revenues. The Joint Legislative Budget Committee on April 9th did share that they're projecting a $1.1 billion deficit with a $500 million variation in either direction related to the reduced sales tax. And we monitor communications from the state agencies and our professional groups regularly to try to anticipate what's going to happen next. But the key takeaway was there are some unknowns, and all things being equal, we would be able to use $6 million a year of that restoration if it continued, but there are some unknowns.
Michelle, since we are discussing unknowns, is it possible to remind us of what would happen if we don't get the bond and override passed in this coming election? What would happen to the school district with regard to repairs and with regard to people and programs if we don't get the bond and override passed?
Yes, and I'll quickly summarize more so on the override, if I may, because that is where we have a clock that's ticking. And as I've shared with the committee, an override's in place for 7 years, and it needs to be renewed by the community in year 5. If not, there are required budget reductions in years 6 and 7. And so we are at that point this November that if we don't, at a minimum, renew our current 13% override in fiscal year 2022, we would incur in excess of $9 million of budget reductions. The following year would be $18 million, and then the override would be fully eliminated in fiscal year 2024, which is $27.8 million. In regard to the bond, what I can share at this point is we have approximately $14,633,000 worth of remaining proceeds. And without another bond on the horizon, the capital needs that have been identified by ADM Group would not be able to be supported with simply our annual capital funding. So with that, did I answer your question, sir?
Yes, and so if we don't get the bond and override passed, it's going to be a lot of changes are going to have to be made within the district. And we're going to be in a worse situation than we are right now. And we don't have a guarantee that this bond and override is going to be passed. And so I think it's just important for us to, as we're talking about these options, to remember that if we don't have control over if it passes or not, And we also are in an environment where we haven't had success. And so if we don't get it passed, the district is going to be in a much worse condition.
Thank you, members. At this
Michelle, this is Jan. I don't need a dollar amount, but can you give us a direction in terms of from the time we close schools till now, is it costing the district more money or less money to run programs, people, whatnot?
And thank you for that question. I can share, I don't think that's part of this agenda item. That would be a separate question. Certainly as we close out the year, we'll be identifying where there have been cost savings and additional costs, frankly, related to COVID-19. And I don't have that analysis available to share with the committee today.
I'm asking is, being on the state reopening committee, going into the future for override purposes, I kind of, it would help for me to know whether continuing what we're doing or even in a hybrid form could potentially cost programs and people more money instead of less money than we're anticipating. So that's why I asked the question, but thank you.
Certainly, and typically when you're doing projections for outcomes related to a change in a model, you would need more data inputs to project long-term, but we will be analyzing all of those factors as we close out the year and look to next year. But I certainly appreciate your question, and that makes sense. Members, to be respectful of the time that we have, if we've answered the questions under this agenda item, I will recommend that we move on to agenda item number 5, which is action, M&O override percentage and funding categories, recommendations and/or bond authorization amounts, category recommendations for November 3rd, 2020 election. We do have a tabled motion from the May 14th meeting as part of this agenda item, and I also would like to ask our committee to please vote with a roll call stating your full name as you take action on motions under this agenda item. And with that, I'll go ahead and direct the agenda item to Dr. Beltram. I believe it was it your motion that was tabled?
Hi, Michelle. No, it was not my motion. It was Mr. Guttridge's motion. However, I would like to move that the tabled motion be brought before the committee so we can further discuss and take action. So I move to reconsider the tabled motion. Is there a second?
I second that motion. This is Kirk Hobbs. I second that motion.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there discussion?
Michelle, this is Rick Guttridge. I would like to, I don't know if this requires an amendment or if it's just part of the discussion as we shape what we might call scenario 4. I would suggest yeah, go ahead.
Let's vote to take this motion off and put it on the table, and then you can start.
Yeah, you're right. I apologize. We should have the vote first.
That's okay.
So I vote in favor of continuing the discussion.
This is Patty Beltram. I vote aye.
This is Danielle Padilla. I vote aye.
Jana Gino, aye.
Mike
Kirk.
Aye.
Kirk Hobbs, aye.
Armando Macias, aye.
Melissa Briggs, aye.
Annette McCarty, aye.
Mary Lynn McCord, aye.
Ray Connolly, aye.
I believe 2 members have not voted. Mrs. Watson, do you have 11 votes tallied?
have 10 only.
For the purpose of the minutes, may I ask the members to restate their vote, please? I apologize for that redundancy.
Jan Ogino, aye.
Rick
Pat
Guthridge,
Belcher.
aye.
Sorry.
Mary Lemon Cord, aye.
Kirk Hobbs, aye.
Patty Beltram, aye.
Melissa Briggs, aye.
Danielle Padilla, aye.
Armando Macias, aye.
Mike Barola, aye.
Annette McCarty, aye.
Ray Connolly, aye.
I now have all 11 members voting aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
So Mr. Guthridge, did you want to say anything about the motion on the table, which was in general? I know we weren't calling it proposal 4, but I think it was recommendations or other discussion. Did you want to talk about that?
Yes, for just a minute. I want to kind of echo Annette's comment that if we move the high school into the contingency fund on this particular scenario, that would give the district the most flexibility in dealing with the situations going forward. And we have a facilities utilization team that's going to be making some decisions on facilities across the district. And I think the amount of spending we're going to need from bonding is going to be at least somewhat tied to what that organization does. So given that we can always buy land, it sounds like, given the way the voter pamphlet stuff is identified, it sounds like that would give the district the most amount of flexibility. And then when the facilities utilization team comes up and makes their recommendations, that could conceivably lead to an increase in M&O budget because we're not spending money on a facility, utilities and things like that. So because we don't know all those details right now, I would amend the committee member input scenario to move the land to the contingency fund. And the other thing I would comment on is I mentioned earlier that I spoke with Senator Gray this morning. Well, he texted back just a minute ago that there is $14.7 million in direct district additional assistance in the budget right now. And I suspect that's just for the next year. Michelle, you can speculate on that. But at least it sounds like for the next year, there's $14.7 million there.
Michelle, this is Ray Connolly. Isn't that what you had provided on the new slide that showed that there was 14.7 if it's reduced by half?
And actually, I'll mention for members who have watched some of the governing board meetings in recent weeks when we were looking at budget team recommendations, we did identify what our projected capital funding is going to be for fiscal year 2021. And of course, that capital funding is dependent on ADM, which is our average daily membership. And what I have shared and what I've restated today is our projected district additional assistance available for capital next year is $14,689,794. And that was included in several board agenda items in recent weeks. So yes, that is a true statement. That does include years 1 through 4 of the restored capital restoration. However, you have to also note that we have department and district-wide budget allocations for instructional aids and different needs. So that full amount does not then become available for bond-related needs. And so with the pro forma that we've shared for fiscal year 2021, it does identify an additional $6 million in combination between facilities and IT. And so that's where I'm referencing that 6 million continuing. So I'm not questioning fiscal year 2021. My comment would be in future years, we would certainly hope that the full restoration would continue, because at this point it was reduced 2.8 million. So we would hope that's coming next year and then would continue in the future. But thank you, Mr. Guthridge, for that comment and clarification.
Mrs. Myers, this is Patty Beltram. If I can make a request, since we only have 1 hour left, can we start to really discuss our motions of what we want to take forward and our priorities? I think that's going to take a whole lot of our discussion. So I'd really like for the next hour to be focused on what proposals we would like to recommend to the board.
Yes, Dr. Beltram, I think that's a very good suggestion. And members, if we would be mindful of the time, we've had wonderful dialogue and I've tried to answer every question. But I agree, Dr. Beltram, at this point, if we could refine the conversation to the motions and the action at hand. Thank you.
To that end, with respect to the committee member input scenario, I would make the following suggestions and then make it a motion that we vote up or down on it, if that's okay. Regarding the land, I would suggest we move that to contingency. Regarding the technology, the 33.75 million includes all of the laptops to go to a student ratio of 1-to-1 from 3rd grade through high school. And I suggest that we drop that particular addition to the technology and drop it back to what was originally requested, which I believe was 28.7 million or something like that. And other than that, I would leave this scenario as it's presented and move that we vote on it with those changes.
Forgive me, Mr. Guthridge. So then what's the total amount that you're making the recommendation for this amendment?
You know, I should know that off the top of my head, and I do not. Let's see, what would that turn into? We would drop about, well, hang on just a minute. Give me just a second here. Okay.
Michelle, could the tech guy move your faces off of the screens that we're looking at?
Thank you, Robert. Would you be kind enough to bring that visual down and minimize it? Thank you. And
does
perhaps
chance have what we're calling scenario 4, proposal 4, the consideration up?
Thank you. Yes, if you could please go back to the PowerPoint, Robert, and advance toward the end where we have committee comments and input scenario, that the committee is also referring to a scenario 4. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think the difference becomes the technology goes from 33.7 down to 28.5 million, 28,470,000 something, whatever was in the original IMT proposal. The only thing that I would take out is, like I say, there was 5,900 laptops for the high school, or for the I can't remember the number, guys. I apologize, but the difference between 33.7 and you take out those 1-to-1 laptops, it drops it to 28.47, and that's the change I would make to this. Move land to contingency. So we would be dropping the total bond amount from 71.3. We would drop that by, let's see, I think that's about 4.7 or 5.7 million. Let me get a calculator here. 33.76 minus 28.47 equals, bear with me just a second, guys. 33.76 minus 28.47 it would drop it by 5.29 million. Basically, it would drop it from 71 down to 66.
Rick, may I ask, this is Ray Conley, why
Yeah,
you would reduce technology in an environment when we have not even gotten all of our technology back that has been loaned out?
Well, the IT guys said that that funding would replace every laptop that we've got now. The only thing that I'm suggesting that we not increase spending on is buying a laptop for every third grader and fourth grader and fifth grader. Right now, I think the ratio is 1 to 3, and I don't think that going 1 to 1 makes sense right at the moment. Now, I wouldn't have any objections to putting in a little bit of money to bump up the ratio on the high schools for the high school seniors, because I think we're going to need to do something with online learning. And we may need a little bit more for the high school kids, but I don't know that we need to go to 1 to 1 for virtually every kid in the district. And that's the only difference between the 28.47 and the 33.7 was to give it to every kid third through high school.
Michelle, this is Armando Macias. Just a quick question. Since we're talking about replacing the older technology devices with new devices, would there be any recouped costs and that we could apply to this if needed?
Thank you for that question. I believe Mr. Gay was asked that question during the presentation, or a version of it, if memory is serving me correctly. And my response would be, technology has a useful life, and it does depreciate in many ways the older a piece of technology becomes. So with upgrades to software and hardware and those types of things, a computer that's 10 years old doesn't have a very high market value. What we do is follow all of the state requirements related to the tracking and disposal of our capital assets. And if there is an opportunity for a trade-in, for instance, that certainly is considered. And I believe there was a question regarding, could some of those older devices then become instructional aids as well to further support our students? And I recall that was discussed, and there was some input provided there. But as far as Mr. Gay's presentation, my comment would be he provided a comprehensive presentation from several years, identifying all of the district's needs from a technology perspective. And so that is the number we've been working with in varying forms. And Mr. Guttridge, I'm doing the math. It looks like you might be rounding, so you're bringing down the 71,307,742 to 66 million rounded, which is
it was basically 71.3 to down by you're right, Michelle. You're better at the math. So
Michelle, this is Patty Beltram. Mr. Guthridge, since I know that you're trying to make an amendment to your motion, but I would ask that instead of us adjusting the amount given your last comment, that if we identify technology and we leave it at that 28 million, that if the district could replace the high school computers, like you're saying, or the high school student computers, we would then have that capacity instead of removing for these 3, 4, 5 that we're providing guidance with this motion that it's 1 to 1 for specific grade levels. Would that be fair to say, instead of reducing the total amount?
I'm not sure what the distinction is, Patty. I'm going to see if I can find the Mr. Gay's presentation real fast, just so I've got the numbers directly in front of me without the rounding.
I'm thinking, though, from what you were saying is, I understand that you would rather keep the ratio for 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders 1 to every 3, but increase for seniors and juniors. So I'm thinking that you would basically be balancing it out. So I think it's really more of guidance, or what we're saying as part of that motion is that we want to make sure that we have priorities for our high schoolers for a one-to-one. I think that's what you're trying to say. So in essence, it would not reduce that total amount for technology and allow for growth because of increased cost of technology as well. I believe that's what you're trying to say.
Well, yeah, that's an option that I would certainly could certainly support. I pulled up Mr. Gay's presentation, and the cost of going at the high school level of going from the 1-to-3 to the 1-to-1 ratio is 1.96 million. Okay, to go at the elementary level, it's an additional 3.325 million. We can go with the high school 1-to-1 because I think that might make sense to do that. But I don't think we should do that at the elementary school. So that would adjust the total amount on that by 3.325 million. So that takes us from 71 to 70, 69, 68 million altogether, 68.3. Michelle, does that sound about right?
Well, what I would recommend, and when you amend a motion, we want to have a clear dollar amount. I've asked Robert to pull up Mr. Gay's presentation, so I have sent that to him, and he just pulled it up. So let's go to the slide that you're referring to, just for the benefit of the committee.
Page 3. It's page 3 of the presentation.
Okay.
And the cost is the third group of bullet points, and the extra high school laptops is 1.6 or 96 million, and the extra elementary laptops will be 3.3 million.
And that's where you're combining the two amounts for your reduction?
Yeah, the only thing I would suggest in the scenario 4 proposal, with everything else that's in the IMT presentation, the total was 33 and some change million. I would suggest we drop that total by the 3.325 million and take the additional elementary laptops off, but leave everything else that's in IT on the proposal.
So, Mr. Guttridge, what I'm hearing that you're proposing, and I'm going to call for the vote, is that you're proposing that for scenario 4, committee comments and input scenario, that the technology line item that we have listed as $33,756,089 be reduced by $5,285,000, reducing that line item in total by that same amount, which in effect reduces the entire bond authorization to $66,022,742.
Okay, Michelle, let me.
I don't believe we have a second to this amendment.
Well, and I don't think that's what Rick is saying. I think yeah.
I was going to say, let me correct you there, Michelle. Instead of taking the 5.228 million off, that was taking off all of the extra high school laptops and all of the extra elementary school laptops. We can put the extra high school laptops back in. So the number that you quoted, increase that by 1.96 million even, because that was the quoted cost for the extra high school laptops to go 1-to-1 at the high school level.
Thank you, Mr. Guttridge. For the benefit of your motion, then would you please restate what total dollar amount you're recommending that we reduce the $33,756,089 total for technology by?
We reduce it by $3,325,000.
Are you adding that to your motion, and then that would subsequently reduce the total bond authorization by that same amount, which would subsequently be a total authorization of $67,982,742. Is that your motion, sir?
That would be my motion, Michelle.
Okay. Is there a second?
This is Kirk Hobbs. I second that motion.
Okay, discussion?
This is Jan. I'm not for any amount of technology being cut. Already, a lot of our schools have been waiting for third through sixth to get one-on-one because it's really difficult scheduling between classes to get work done online, particularly when they are required to do X amount of work online every week. And so that reduces the flexibility of teachers who either teach by content area or teachers who teach all content to give the students that needed time online. Besides the fact that AZM2 is being given online, they need actually more time on the computer for practice rather than less. They need to learn how to use productivity tools, which they now don't have time to do because we spend so much time on platforms. So yeah, my vote would be no to reduce. In fact, we should, at this time when we do need a one-on-one, we need more money for technology, not less.
This is Patty Beltram. I speak in opposition to this amendment because of the same items that Jan was talking about. I believe we need more money to technology. However, I believe we could issue a statement to the governing board for them to consider making a recommendation upon the bond passing of adjusting the total amount or consideration of elementary laptop costs to be adjusted to handle other technology. So in essence, I speak in opposition to this amendment.
Michelle, this is Rick Guttridge. Based on Jan's insights as, you know, being in the classroom and Patty's experience as our career and technical person, if they both feel that those laptops are really genuinely needed, then I would withdraw that reduction and simply say we move the land to contingency and leave the amount as it is.
Okay, we have a modified, a withdrawn, and then modified motion. Is there a second?
This is Ray Connolly. I second that.
Okay, we have a second for that. Discussion, members?
Michelle, how are we doing on time?
We are at 11:14. We have a firm stop at noon today to honor member commitments. We do have a special governing board meeting this Thursday, so if the committee could pace the conversation and action items accordingly. Thank you.
If there's no further discussion on this, I would move that we call for the vote on it. If there's discussion, by all means, let's have that. But if we don't need to discuss it any further, I would suggest we go ahead and vote one way or the other.
This is Beltram. Let's call for the question so that we can discuss our priority order that we're going to give recommendations to the board. So this is Patty Beltram. I vote aye for this third option.
This is Annette McCarty. I vote no.
This is Melissa Briggs. I vote no.
This is Kirk Hobbs. I vote aye.
This is Mike Barola. I vote no.
This is Rick. I vote aye.
This is Mary Lynn McCord. I vote no.
Armando Macias, no.
Ray Connolly, no.
This is Danielle Padilla. I vote no.
Is there a member who's abstaining from this vote?
Jan, did you vote on this?
Jan, are you still on the meeting call? We're checking right now if she's still with us. We might be experiencing a technical difficulty with Mrs. Ogino.
Michelle, are you talking about me?
Yes, ma'am.
My computer froze, so I had to get on my phone, and I'm trying to log back onto my computer. So right now I'm on Teams on my phone. So I voted no.
And to repeat, your vote was nay or no?
Yes.
Thank you.
And this is Kirk Hobbs. At the risk of being out of order, I guess I'd like to offer to the group that this is just an option, and we voted for other options that we did not feel would pass, that we felt the community would not give us support for, but we did vote for it as an option for the governing board to consider. And I think that it would be only fair in the process for us to also offer a option that may not be what you want, but may be an option for the governing board to consider.
Michelle, this is Patty Beltram. Can I start a motion so that Mr. Hobbs could enter his debate into?
May I repeat for the record the count from the last vote, please? We had 8 nays and 3 ayes. The motion failed. Thank you.
Michelle, this is Patty Beltram. I make a motion, I move that we give a recommendation to the board that includes the 13% override option of our proposal 1 as a first option for board, proposal 2 as the second option for the board, and provide a note that we had much discussion over what we're calling, sorry, the screen is blocking it, but we're calling proposal 4, that we provide that note for the board.
Thank you. And just for reference, I've asked Robert, perfect Robert, thank you, for proposal 4 backup. So we have a motion from Dr. Beltram. Is there a second?
Michelle, this is Mike Roll. I'm having a hard time hearing you on that last bit. Could you please repeat that?
Yes, please. I was just going to ask the same thing.
She just asked if there was a second to my motion so we could start to talk.
This is Danielle Padilla. I second the motion.
Hold on, please. Can you please repeat your motion, Patty? Because you were cutting in and out.
Certainly. Okay, so our first motion to give priority order to our board is number 1, we recommend a 13% override. Second, we give priority order to our bonds as our first proposal is proposal number 1 as presented. Our second choice is proposal number 2. And that we provide notes on the discussion of what's before us right now, committees, comments, input scenario, or what we call option 4.
Members, if you're not actively speaking, may I ask you to mute? I believe we have a number of open mics which might be creating feedback. Thank you. Was the membership able to hear Dr. Beltram's summary?
At the risk of sounding like a pain, I'm sorry, but yeah, that feedback kind of, on option 4, can you just repeat that part, please? Or the third option? Sorry.
So the motion was not to provide a third option, but to provide notes on our discussion about the committee comments and input scenario. In other words, what's in front of us right now on the screen, we've been sort of calling it proposal number 4. So we're only providing right now on this current motion, but it can be amended and discussed, is 13% override. First priority is proposal 1. Second priority is proposal 2.
This is Danielle Padilla. I second the motion again so we can discuss.
Thank you. As the motion maker, I'm just wanting to make sure that we provide notes outlined for the board of the comments that were made on proposal 4. However, I believe that the order that we find priority based on our previous debates is actually the first bond proposal is being our number 1 choice, but it was the second one that we discussed, and that our second choice be the bond proposal number 2, which is the first one we discussed.
Robert, thank you. For the benefit of the committee, would you please scroll up and redisplay scenario number 1 and scenario number 2 to remind the governing board of the past action, or, pardon me, not governing board, pardon me, Citizens Advisory Committee, rather, of the past action that has been taken for a recommendation to the governing board. Thank you. This is scenario number 1 and then scenario number 2.
This is Melissa Briggs. I support everything that was just said, except for I don't see the need for notes. Since there are going to be minutes produced from this meeting, the governing board can reference our minutes if they choose.
Good point.
Patty, would you like to amend your motion then?
It's not part of the priority order, so I don't need to amend it. So it's just a good note that she just made. So it's a good point.
Is there any other discussion on this motion?
This is Jan. I agree with Patty on those priorities.
Are there any other comments or discussion points before we call for the vote?
This is Annette McCarty. I agree with Patty on those points, and listening to the governing board study session on Friday, they were, a majority really looked at continuing with our 13% override and having a couple bond scenarios that focused on our critical and essential needs, including a land purchase. And there was conversation also regarding, making sure that our community is supportive and being mindful of their taxes. And because we've chosen to go with a critical and essential needs bond scenario, in all of the scenarios that Stifel, our Brian Lundberg, presented to us, when we go with such skinny critical needs bonds, the tax rate decreases over the next couple years, so that if we do choose to go for a construction bond of a high school, which will be necessary, we will have the opportunity to do that while seeing those tax rates decrease in the next few years too. So I support I support Patty's suggestion.
Are there any other discussion points to share? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote, please.
This is Annette McCarty. Abraham, I vote yes.
This is Armando Macias. Sorry, Jan.
That's okay.
This is Armando Macias. Yes.
This is Patty Beltram. Aye.
Mary Lynn McCord, I vote yes.
This is Melissa Briggs. I vote aye.
This is Mike Barola. I also vote aye.
Ray Connolly, aye.
This is Danielle Padilla, aye.
This is Rick Guttridge, no.
I believe 2 members need to vote, please.
This is Kirk Hobbs. I vote no.
Jan, are you ready to vote, please?
I vote yes.
Thank you. We have 9 yays or yeses and 2 nays or nos. The motion passes. Thank you. Members, are there any other motions or action items under this agenda item?
Michelle, I would just like to make a quick comment. The reason I voted no was because I don't support these recommendations. I don't have a problem with taking them to the governing board with those priorities, but the only way for me to express that I think these are not good recommendations is to vote no against them. Otherwise, I don't have any problem with the priorities that the committee has suggested.
Thank you, Mr. Guttridge. Members, are there any other motions or action that you would like to take under this agenda item? Hearing no further discussion or motions, it appears we are ready to move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 6, revisit prior agenda items. Would any of the committee members like to revisit a prior agenda item? Hearing no comment, we can then move on to agenda item number 7, which is requests for information and future agenda items if needed. I believe the committee's work may be coming to an end today with the action that has been taken. And so with that, are there any requests for future information or agenda items, as I don't believe there will be another meeting based on the work that was done today? Are there any requests under this agenda item?
Michelle, this is, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Annette. You're probably going to do what I'm doing.
Yeah, this is Annette. I understand that from Friday's meeting that the governing board was trying to schedule an additional meeting this week and that they are running up against a timeline. Could you walk us through that a little bit?
Thank you. Yes, we do have a special governing board meeting scheduled for this Thursday, which is to address the recommendations from the committee to provide direction to administration to bring forward on May 28th resolutions for consideration and or approval related to a bond and or override election in November of 2020. So the committee's work that has been completed today will become part of the agenda item this Thursday, and the board will give administration further direction related to the May 28th governing board meeting.
Annette, that was what I was going to ask. So my only other information request is what time on Thursday?
Thank you. I'm going to ask for a team member to remind me of that time, so I'm certain to give you the correct time. Let me see if I can pull that up.
Mrs. Myers, this is Mrs. Airy.
Thank you, Mrs. Airy.
The governing board is currently scheduled to meet at 12 noon on Thursday, the 21st.
Members, are there any additional requests for information at this point? Hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 8, which is adjournment. And prior to requesting a motion to adjourn, I would like to say thank you to the committee. The amount of hours you've spent attending meetings, reviewing the information that administration has shared, as well as some of our guest presenters. And we are really indebted to all of you for your input and the time that you've spent and the thorough discussion and the sharing of perspectives. And I wanted to say thank you very much on behalf of Mr. Duguid and myself and administration for all the work you've done as part of this committee. Thank you.
Michelle, if because this is our last meeting, this is Annette McCarty, and I'm feeling a little nostalgic because yesterday I did the parade with Daniel up at Liberty High School. Ooh, this is hard. So it's been a rough spring and not a fan of distance learning with my high school senior. It was really rough. But I want to thank this committee, each and every one of you. Whether we agree or disagree, it's always very respectful. And looking at my last 3 years of binders and the amount of information that is provided by the school district from our resources, and thanking our governing board for getting the facility utilization study accomplished, and also getting the compensation study accomplished so that we could see how we measured against our surrounding school districts. And when our community saw the shortfall that we were paying our teachers less, irregardless of the promises made, we still were behind. We're still 49th in the nation in pay, and then so that 13% continuation at least keeps us where we're taking care of our teachers, and that's where I wanted to end with this. Our teachers have been just fabulous, instrumental in my children's success. One in mechanical engineering 3rd year at NAU, one going to U of A, and they're just, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the district. I bought here prior to having children in '96 because I knew a good, strong district helped maintain my home value. And then it did more than that. So sorry for the emotions, but I want to thank you all.
Thank you. Members, do we have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved. This is Patty.
Armando Macias, I second.
Thank you. And we'll do a final roll call vote on this adjournment, please. All in favor to adjourn?
Aye.
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 Patty Beltram, aye.
Mrs. Watson, we didn't have a clear roll call vote, but I heard ayes. May I ask, are there any nays from the committee? Or abstentions? Do you have 11 ayes counted as the vote to adjourn?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. The meeting is adjourned. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.